Hello. It is a gloomy afternoon here in Philadelphia. I was just so dark these days. Oh my gosh. I think I have to go get a Christmas tree or something and have it a little bit brighter in here because it's sort of gloomy. I was looking at the weather and it's supposed to be cloudy and rainy for the next 2 weeks, more or less. So, yeah, I'm going to have to come up with something to keep my spirits up. So I've been meaning to work on this all day, and I have this larger presentation that I'm working on to match up with the long ago discussion Lynn and I did about the Vatican and Evan Baer of Learned Capital and what they were doing with their stakeholder capitalism, impact finance plans for early childhood education. And so I have a slide deck that's growing exponentially. But I had something I wanted to do as sort of a quick thought experiment and put it out there for people. Not that I have this all dialed in, but really I'm imagining that we're part of a distributed cognition puzzle solving program. This is what's been on my mind, sort of bubbling up the last couple of days. And I wanted to sort of put it out and see if people want to play with these puzzle pieces and see what they think. So it might be a little triggering for some people because I think it sort of mixes in like evolution and religion and that sort of thing. I mean, my current frame, just to be clear, like I think practice of faith and spirit are really important. I don't believe that there's only one way to do it because I really wouldn't want there just to be one world of religion because then it would be pretty boring. But I think you should be authentic to your cultural faith practice and be probably skeptical of institutions, being maybe loving in those institutions, but holding them accountable. And then, but that probably these relationships are more directly like you with the divine, and that takes a lot of different frames. And at this point, I'm of a feeling that likely we, our life force, our spirit, we get more than one go round to learn lessons. And so that there is this creative force of fabric in the universe, however you imagine God to be, and that we kind of, I like this idea of a, unfolding creation of which we are a part, and we individuate and we show up, and then we have these learnings, and then we have our times coming up, and then we might come back. And so I had mentioned this book before. This is this Rediscovering the Integral Cosmos, Physics, Metaphysics, and Vertical Causality. I keep dipping back into it, and it's hard. I mean, it's above my pay grade. It's not a very thick book, but it's this MIT like quantum computing guy and this other religious mystic metaphysics person, and they're essentially trying to sort of put together, how we understand reality with quantum physics, with cosmology. And so this is what I wanted to put out, and this is going to be just a short one here. But they're talking in this integral cosmos about verticality and tapping on an idea that goes back to the Greek, I think, that's called trichotomy. So if you imagine dichotomy is 2 parts, trichotomy is 3 parts. And so there's like, for people who are super religious, there's many, many arguments out there about which is the right one, and which is stuff I just really, I don't care to be involved in those particular discussions. But dichotomy is sort of like that there's the body and the spirit. And then, yes, I see the hanging thief. Yes, Pierce is about trichotomy, and I'm still trying to figure out his like semiotics and operant and interpretant and how and it's also like Pythagoras and triangles too, maybe too, some of it. And triangulation, if you think about the 5G and all that stuff, it's all about triangulation. And I was reading a recent book. It was All the Light You Cannot See. And the little boy had to keep doing triangles over and over and over again. So there's something about the tri part. So trichotomy is the idea, again, it's pre-Christian, that it's, what did they say? Essentially like body, soul, and spirit. I mean, and then they have Greek words for that. Corpus, anima, and spiritus. Okay, so those are the 3 parts. And I never really thought about it like that, but I feel like the corpus, the body, is the physical part. That's ultimately, it's like there's an expiration date on that, and then that's done. And then the spirit is infinite and part of the divine fabric of the universe, and that's immortal. And then the soul is the go-between, right? So it's like the bridge, and that like the divinity of the whole program that we're part of, like comes through that field, like through the soul and into the human, so that like we have a spark of the divine within us. And so there's a bridge, and it's really been hitting on me a lot of these organizations that have ideas about bridging. And I was sharing a map with Steffers, and it was talking about Blue Meridian, and she was looking at it and said, oh, well, does it overlap with Bridgespan? Now, I have a lot of maps of Bridgespan, which is a spinoff of Bain. And they're involved in impact finance too, but not in that particular map. But I'm like, okay, a bridge span, right? A bridge span. And then one of the main remote ed tech companies international globally is called Bridge International Academies. And that's based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so what they do, it's invested in by many, many major hedge funds and MIT Media Lab and Facebook and all these people. And for a while they were getting a bad rap, dutifully so, but it's a superficial bad rap. It's not the deeper bad rap, because what they would do is they had a model of privatized schools in Africa and maybe India, where the families would pay school fees, and then the kids would all, sit on a bench in, a very basic building. And then the teachers would have an iPad, and then they would be coached remotely through this iPad. And then, that was the education model. And it was privatized. But again, that's ultimately, eventually the goal is like the one laptop, one child Negroponte program, is that all the kids are going to have these cheap device. They won't be iPads at that point. They'll be phones or, wearables, maybe just a wristwatch or something. And then they'll be incorporated into the Internet of Bodies remotely as agents in the game, because that's how this game is going to run. But then it's also a bridge. And so I'm kind of holding this in my mind. Okay. The soul is maybe, I don't know if you could picture it as, an interpreter, like the language or the conceptual structure of the divine into the limited sensory space of what it means to be, existing as a human in this material realm. It might be like an electrical step down system, right? Like all the superpower, like Barbara Dewey is saying, like, you can't handle that much power. You got to step it down. Like the soul is like that mediating part in the bridge. And so you've, in the mythology, right, is that, back to the classical mythology, is that when you die, you go over the river Styx and the ferryman, and then you if you get to go over, and then you're supposed to bathe in the river of forgetfulness. I think it's the river Lethe, before you can come back around. So you can't come back in with the knowledge that you acquired while you were in a corporeal form on the earth. You have to start over. And I think that's probably kind of like the whole karmic aspect, right? It's cheating probably if you like you have to gradually work your way up to it, but you're not supposed to get an extra start. And I was actually talking with somebody yesterday about this, and one of the ideas they were entertaining, because they were very, I think their lived experience of somebody about my age, was that they were just tired of having learned all the wrong things, and that they wish that there was the capacity of just wiping somebody's memory and starting over. And from their framework, like that felt like a kindness, just to blank slate wipe somebody's memory clean. And I was like, oh no, like my feeling was like, no, you, like, that's part of you. That's your experience. Like I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't go through all these phases. I didn't do huge swings of like who I was as an individual, but you learn, and that's part of your story. And if you erase that, then even if you've got an imprinted of what the right way to be, then that's like, I don't know, to me, that didn't feel like the right thing. I'm like, you need to do the work, and then you internalize it in your biology and in your consciousness, and then that's part of you. But I think when they're talking about guided evolution and longevity, right, or immortality, digital immortality, or all of these things, is if you imagine that the soul is a bridge. And again, we're thinking back to Mercury keeps coming up, in a lot of things I'm encountering. And Mercury is the messenger god, right? And he has the capacity of going from one realm to the other, from the living to the dead, and then back. And that's a unique talent. And he's also the god of commerce. So exchange. So then we've got all of the free market and the econophysics. And he's also a god of information management, right? So then you've got all of the semiotics and the Umwelt baked in. And so in some ways, he's kind of like the god of complexity. And so that is like a bridge, like the Mercury is going back and forth between these realms. And again, I keep kind of coming back to Children's Health Defense being called the Mercury Project and keeping that in mind. So if this idea that the soul is a bridge, it's going back and forth. We know that, Vitalik Buterin and Glenn Weil at Microsoft and Pooja Olhaver have this idea of the soul-bound token. Now, they didn't come up with that. I think originally it was part of video game design. But if you imagine the video game design, it's almost kind of like a karmic thing, although not maybe emotional evolution. But you have a skill, you have players, you can save them. I don't know if you get to save your objects. Maybe people who are gamers can chime in and tell me. But like if you get to a certain level and you have these items, which I think that's where the soulbound token came in, you have to get, it's nothing you can buy. You actually have to achieve with a certain level of competency, a skill, and then that badge is given to you, that object, and then that stays with your profile, right? So that's almost a reincarnation, like these characters in the gaming things. And so that's going to carry over, this concept, I think, is carrying over into the soulbound token. So soulbound tokens are different from NFTs in that they're attached to your identity. They're not speculative. You can't sell them. You can't trade them. And so my initial expectation at the time was that those soulbound tokens were metadata tags, and that ultimately our digital twins would be built up of piles of these soulbound tokens, right? And I guess there's maybe you could question how small or minor a thing would be to be a soulbound token, or if it's just big out contours of your life or little contours of your life. But like, if you imagine as you're going through the motions and relating to people and doing things in life, that these stacks and stacks of tokens are like digitally representing you as a graph, I guess, these social graphs. Michael Zargham's always talking about the social graphs. And so you become a graph of tokens. That when it's your time to cross the bridge over, and imagine like you would have, I would presume that if there is such a thing as reincarnation, then that you join the divine, and then you spend your time there, and then you show back up for some purpose, if it's to continue to learn your lessons or achieve nirvana or whatever. You come back in and there's a unique signature there. And so I can imagine at that bridge, at that portal, like that's where the tokens are going to sit, right? Like you can't take them with you, right? Because there's something between an energy system, because they would be energetically represented, and a corporeal system, but they're not immortal, these tokens. And so when I was reading the Adrian Tchaikovsky books, like a key piece of the thing about the spiders in the first book was they had these portids, I think they were called, and they had family lineages, and through the terraforming of their planet remotely by the human race, they had become super intelligent, and so they were able to keep their intelligences from previous generations, and they called those understandings, and that those were within their biology. So it was almost like inheriting a family library of experience, but it was immediately accessible. Like you didn't have to go to a library and pull a book off the shelf. It was just internal into their consciousness. But it wasn't the whole community. Like different lineages had different accesses. And so there was sort of a caste system there, and like a power dynamic system. But to me, that's what we're talking about with Lamarck, like the Lamarckian. And again, for so long within the evolutionary, the Darwinian evolution, they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. The giraffes don't have long necks because they're reaching for the treetops. That just happened. It's not really how it goes. But now I think we are to a point that even if we're not doing inheritance of genetic modifications, which may be the case, in these tokens, in this thought experiment I'm playing with. And again, I'm not in any way saying this is definitely the thing, but I'm trying to get in the headspace of why we're having these soulbound tokens, and like how it might relate to this trichotomy is that if on the bridges there are these piles of tokens, and they're linked to our energetic unique identifier signatures. So you go back and then your time's up and then you come back over the bridge. Theoretically, there would be an option to reclaim your tokens, right? And then, or possibly blend tokens, right? Or have access to other tokens. Like these tokens are sitting on these infinite bridges across the corporeal space and the spiritual space. And there's going to be the ferryman or whoever, the St. Peter with the keys, who's on the bridge saying yay or nay, or who gets what. And I feel like I know this maybe is a little bit further out, but I keep saying the faith communities are a key part of the program. And at the time when I was looking at impact finance, I said, okay, I know this because you guys are doing the social welfare services and you're going to be calling the shots, and the federal money will come through you and the 1,000 points of light, and you'll run the programs and you'll get the impact data off of the homeless people and the food bank and for the elderly and the school in the basement or whatever, like whether it's the mosque or the synagogue or the church, those guys are all going to be lined up there, right? And so I feel like where we're at now, a little bit, I've said one of the struggles I think is over this umwelt and controlling our umwelt and our sensory apparatus and our sense making apparatus. But the other thing is I feel like there's going to the spoils of life, maybe spoils isn't the best word, but like the byproduct are these graphs, which are the tokens. And that they're imagining that you could bring in a holographic person, right? A holographic guide from beyond, like based on these tokens. They're already conceptualizing it. I mean, like the Global Education Futures people that they wrote 10 years ago. Oh, you can establish your course of educational trajectory based on some key business person you like you could just bring Peter Drucker right back in here as a hologram and like have him walk you through your paces to mentor you in your business and management theory course trajectory, right? So they've already done it on Star Wars, right? They've digitized people and they're bringing them back, and you can imagine that plus the wisdom. So the porteds and the understandings. And in that way, I sort of think of like the lineages and the importance of like the ancestry.coms, and not strictly just limiting it to the DNA. Although I do think that there may be some sort of harmonization of the soul signal or your spirit signal that maybe reverberates across lineages, but that getting all of that mapped out. And then again, a lot of it overlaps with the LDS Church. And then that got sold to Blackstone, I believe, a few years ago. And so there's something in the DNA, but I think beyond just the DNA, it's actually like, what are the lineages and what are these understandings that could be knit together? So I don't know if that totally makes sense to people, like chime in if it makes sense. But to me, like in thinking about this the trichotomy, the role of the soul as the intermediary, and then thinking about where different interests would be positioning themselves to secure control over those tokens and graphs, like over that access point of the bridge, right? There are many of these things like, pay attention, notice, and I bet you'll start to see a lot more things that are talking about bridges. I was just revisiting today because I'm working through the Vatican stuff and thinking about, again, again, the Holy Trinity too. Dallas and Texas in general is a center for the human capital investing in the kids, and they have the Trinity River. But then in Salt Lake City, when Jason and I visited, and I've been there a couple times, when I first went, there was someone pointing out the Cathedral of the Magdalene or the Madeleine in Salt Lake City, which I think is the only cathedral to Mary Magdalene in North America. And it's a lovely church. It's not huge. It's good size. It's got some beautiful, like maybe 19 teens artwork in it, Art Nouveau sort of craftsman. But there's that chapel, the chapel of Our Lady of Zion there with the Magdalene, and there were 2 stained glass windows put in. One for Vatican II, and it's not a small thing to put a stained glass window in a big a stone cathedral. That's a bit of work. And so one is the church is ecumenicalism, which I believe is a boat, like maybe a candle on a boat. There's something on a boat, definitely. And the boat feels like consciousness too. And then the second was the church turning to the modern world. And then that, I mean, and this is in their own description from their own interpretive guide for the cathedral, that was represented by the logo of the United Nations. So within this small, I don't know, 15 by 15 foot chapel, you've got Zion, which is intimately connected to the LDS Church. You pretty much have the LDS Church there. Like there's really nowhere in Salt Lake City that's not present, even in the cathedral. And then you've got the Catholic Church. And then that what Evan Baer was doing, and I have a clip on my channel that I put up a day or so ago of him. It's from last year, but he's essentially sort of chastising the people in the room for for putting the brakes on the venture capitalists. And we should just let venture capitalists do what they're going to do and drive the boat at 60 miles an hour with no life vests, because shame on us for trying to slow them down. But that Powder Mountain, all of the ed tech stuff is just hovering right there over Salt Lake City. So, and it's the educational technology that's out in front of building up the token graph of the Soulbound tokens. It's health data and education data. So anyway, that's just sort of what is on my mind. I'm going to go back to trying to actually process this a little bit more. But again, you've got the figure 8, which to me is sort of the infinity, looping around there and back again. And what would it mean? I can see how it would dovetail both with the longevity studies, with this digital immortality that, Lincoln Cannon talks about, raising the dead. But not everybody's going to get access, right? Not everybody's going to get equal access. The world really isn't built that way. So those bridges are going to be things that powerful interests are going to want to be out in front of securing those tokenized bridges. And what does that mean for what may be going on behind the scenes with these Vatican human flourishing projects? So beyond the materialism of the physical body, that there's I don't know that your tokens, they're somewhere in between, right? If you imagine this soul is somewhere in between the divine and the corporeal, that they're this hybrid. And I think that the digital twin tokens would be your hybrid self. So anyway, so thanks for joining in. I'm going to have more to say about the Vatican, but that's just a chunk that I wanted to put out there so that we can kind of toy around with it if it's interesting to you, because I hadn't really heard of that. And again, it goes back to the Greek, the trichotomy. So, but of course it's in line with the Trinity and perhaps the Trinity River in Dallas too. So, okay. Bye everybody.